Welcome, everyone, to the Next Decision podcast. I'm Sal Fuentes, the CEO of Decision Counsel. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by a true legend in the B2B go-to-market space. If you've been marketing or selling highly considered, probably expensive, strategic solutions to business over the past 30 years, you've been touched by Tony Uphoff's work. He is an award-winning CEO, board member, advisor, and mentor. He has specialized in turning around organizations, growing revenue, and transforming enterprise performance. He has led some pretty legendary organizations such as ThomasNet, UBM, TechWeb, VNU Media, The Hollywood Reporter, which I got to find out more about, Information Week, and Business.com. He is currently the CEO of one of the top B2B go-to-market lead generation and revenue companies, Pipeline 360. They do demand generation probably better than anybody else. So without further ado, Tony, I can't thank you enough for joining us.
Hey, Sal, it is so great to see you. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Thanks very much.
Strategic decisions are kind of what we focus on here. And when I think about the year ahead, I was wondering if when you think about B2B CMOs, because I know you guys work with them a lot, is there anything going into 2026 you think they should really be focusing on?
Boy, there's a ton, Sal, out there. No need to overstate that. I think there's a few that I would suggest, and I don't want to get into the overhype here, but I do think there are some trends lining up that make this the perfect storm in many regards. And certainly the biggest, Sal, let's rip it from the headlines, is the mainstreaming of artificial intelligence. And I think, classic, you and I have seen these cycles before where a mainstreaming product is both overhyped and underhyped at the exact same moment in time. And we're witnessing that right now. And I think we're overhyping how fast it's going to change everything in marketing. And we're probably underhyping over time the impact AI will have, particularly on B2B marketing because of the data centricity and the power of it. So I'd put that as kind of number one. And what I'd really say is I think we will start to see in 2026 that there will be a segmentation of high-performing, mid-performing, and low-performing B2B marketing teams. And I think that upper right quadrant, Sal, is going to be at least a basic harnessing of the power of artificial intelligence. And so most CMOs I come into contact with, I can't even get there before they ask me the question. Hey, Tony, I know you guys are experimenting with AI. What would you recommend? What should we be looking at? Another one, Sal, I'd mention, is I think we're going to finally see the convergence of brand and demand marketing. These have been silos since you and I started in this business, many, many years ago. And I think they have become so fragmented that marketers aren't really understanding the power of how these really work together. So I think that idea of branded demand is going to take off, and I think we're going to finally see that convergence. Some of that is the data and the technology and the power of artificial intelligence. But I think, Sal, I'll pause there and get your take. Those are two big trends that I get a lot coming at me from CMOs, and I find myself engaging with CMOs about.
I would totally agree. And I think what's interesting is, we used to talk about ABM and B2B GTM in regards to the stack, Salesforce, HubSpot. And then the leads were kind of an external thing that I pumped into the ecosystem. Now the discussions we're having are like, well, AI is going to kind of take over the ecosystem piece.
Correct.
And really facilitate everything from who we should be going after, what content they're getting, until they finally come out at the end to a salesperson or maybe a sales agent, right? So that's the fascinating piece is this the death of the stack and really the emergence of a service?
So it's interesting. And look, you may know that, we have championed this idea of demand as a service, and it's the way we go to market at Pipeline 360. So I would argue, Sal, I have a vested interest in that thesis coming true. But if you kind of run the math on this, take a look at it, right? You have an astounding level of tech sprawl in ad tech and martech. I think the latest is there's 15,000 individual point solutions in martech today. And it is just remarkable. And then you look at those silos that get created based on the adoption of this stuff. And then you throw in intent data and ABM data, all the different things that are swirling around. And I think if we're really, really honest, when you talk to a lot of CMOs privately, they struggle to point to an ROI. And the CFO of those organizations are knocking on their door saying, hey, can you point out exactly what we're getting as a return on that investment? I believe, Sal, that we're going from a software as a service to service as software. And in the world we live in, we've translated that strategy into demand as a service. And I think that idea of delivering a service and delivering outcomes and not forcing companies to have this huge tech stack that becomes a labor in and of itself, if you know what I mean. You have to hire specialized people to manage it, and you're spending all this time and energy on it, where I think a lot of marketers have reached the point where they're like, hey, I'm a marketer. I don't have a computer science degree. I didn't sign up to manage technology. I signed up to manage marketing and manage customers. So yeah, I think that shift you're talking about, Sal, is a very big deal. And I think it's going to accelerate in 2026, but I think this is going to play out over a period of years.
So you touched on a couple of things there that really fascinate me. And one is the relationship of a chief revenue officer to a chief marketing officer. And we've had a lot of discussions with our peers, and it's funny because not to bore the audience, we grew up in the era of the executive VP of sales and marketing.
Yeah.
Right. It kind of bifurcated and blew up into the CMO, CRO. And now we're seeing this trend to where I, at least at our clients, a lot of CROs are owning the go-to-market pipeline and owning the CMO role as part of the revenue supply chain. I don't know if you've seen that, but I am seeing this idea that marketing is really part of the whole integrated sales story and managed as such, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, Sal, I think, if I go forward, these were coordinated efforts, certainly, and have been for, as long as I can certainly remember growing up in B2B. But now they've actually become a flywheel. And by a flywheel, I mean that they become interdependent to get the flywheel to really roll the way we need it to. And if you watch how that's happening in a lot of companies, I think you're seeing things like Chief Growth Officer that's emerging. That's kind of an interesting title that I would argue 5 years ago you didn't hear as much. Lately, you're starting to hear it. And is that role that fusion of what you're talking about? I was talking to a company recently who said that they're looking at a functional role. I don't know if they'll use this title, but they call Chief Churn Officer. So this is somebody solely focused on lapsed accounts or accounts that have not been with the business for a while. And I'm thinking that's interesting. And the way they describe it is sort of like beyond customer success, but really focused on engaging with lapsed accounts at a much more profound and executive level. Long way back to your question. I think you will see more of this, but I'm not always convinced it's going to get subsumed by the CRO. I think you could make an argument that you're going to see more and more CMOs start to take over revenue responsibility. Now, this is a bit out of field.
Yeah.
Right. But if you look at in the B2B market or B2C market, if you look at the still relatively new CEO of Starbucks, he was a marketer.
Yeah.
Right. You look at now, again, very different industries than what you and I are describing here, and less direct selling and some of the complexities we deal with in B2B. But I wouldn't count out the idea that really talented marketers have gotten so into driving tangible revenue and pipeline that the next step of, hey, how are we actually physically going to market? What's our channel strategy? How do we look at this whole thing? You could see it go in both directions.
So it's interesting. I remember, for the past 10 years, I've been fascinated by Basecamp. They have this project management software. I think the parent company's 37 Signals, who doesn't have a sales force, doesn't have a success team, right?
Yeah.
And the entire thing is pipeline created through digital interface. And I think you can do that for a 10K and less software, right? But if I'm buying, $100,000 radiology technology, or I'm buying, $1 million of networking equipment, I kind of want someone to be upset at if it goes wrong,
Yeah.
right? So that idea fascinates me, right? Is there are models that people have proven that below a certain threshold, we're willing to accept very little human interaction, right? And so I always look at this dynamic, which is sales team required, sales team not required,
Yep.
and in the role of marketing as the glue between the scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah. Sal, as usual, you're onto something. And I think it's interesting. It could be dollar value. It could be product complexity. There's a lot of interesting things there. I think not unlike my earlier comments about SaaS, where I think everybody SaaSified everything and some products shouldn't really be SaaSed, if you will, from a business model point of view. I think PLG, product-led growth, has been, like Basecamp, that fascinating to see. But I think we've seen some companies that have attempted to go PLG that frankly really needed a direct sales force. And whether they saw that in their churn rates or other things that were out there, I think you're spot on. And, it's interesting. One of the things that I was spending a little over a year ago now, a fair amount of time studying the top cloud vendors and their growth trajectories and, sales strategies and things like that. And around the mainstreaming of Gen AI, a lot of people predicted that it was going to be death to partner marketing and channel strategies, and it would change everything. Exactly the opposite, Sal, has happened. And so they are investing more in channel strategies. They're investing more in direct sales strategies. And part of it is because this remarkable technology really makes most sense when you have domain expertise. If you're selling a reasonably horizontal technology, right? To come and talk to like you and me, boy, they better know what the hell they're talking about in B2B marketing. If they can't, we're probably not going to take the meeting.
It's funny. Okay, we didn't make this up. So you watching should know that Tony and I spent no time rehearsing this. I was with Matt York, the CEO of the channel company this week.
Yes.
He had his event in New York this week.
Great guy.
Right. And it's funny because they are finding, particularly the bigger the organization, the Amazon Web Services or the Google Cloud, they don't actually have the ability to specify in any given market because of the scale they operate at. And if they want to go after hotel information management systems, they need a complete channel model, content model, sales lead gen model, completely external of the company.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating to me that these large platforms.
Yeah. And I don't know, Sal, it's one of those types of market trends that as I look back, I think, Tony, you should have predicted this and written about it or called up Matt and said, hey, you're about to get run over with all these opportunities. I didn't see it. Yeah. I really didn't. But now I think, it's, I'll call it a positive unintended consequence of technology. Oftentimes we think it's going to jog us left and it takes us in a completely different direction of value and opportunity.
Yeah. I'll finish this thought up with, I was talking to a friend of mine who is about to do a AI startup, and he was talking in terms of very much, I would call the classic demand-based ABM intensify kind of mindset. Yeah. And then I said, that's all done. Like do that exact model, but do it for dentist equipment, right? Like I think the verticalization categories are still ripe for innovation. I think the big bets have been made on the macro.
I agree.
So let me throw this out. You work with a lot of companies and you touch a lot of different organizations. Is there anybody you think is doing this particularly well? Like you're like, you know what? They really kind of have a finger on the pulse, and they're starting to do some cool stuff.
Boy, there's a ton. And I'll tell you, we have our business today is, probably the dominant, what you and I would think of as vertical would be enterprise technology. So we kind of work with, I hate to say everybody, but an awful lot of companies, and then a series of sub verticals by, cybersecurity or whatever it might be. And I think a lot of the mid-market tech companies are doing some really clever work in some of the areas that we're describing here. And, it's no longer a mid-market company, but watching what Shopify did, I thought was really fascinating, and some of the work we did with them. And, they're sort of obvious today. A couple of years ago, it was less obvious what was going on there. I think for a large company, I've been impressed with some of the things that Salesforce has done, and particularly some of the stuff that they're doing outside of the US. I think their global marketing strategy has been really, very interesting and innovative to watch what they're doing. I think some of the stuff that GitLab is doing, and I don't know where we'd put them in terms of size of company, but they're doing some really clever, interesting, innovative ideas. And it's interesting. We were talking earlier, Sal, about this idea of, as a service, demand as a service. If you encompass all the components of B2B marketing and deliver the outcomes, one of the things that when we first launched that, we sort of thought, gosh, this is going to appeal to mid-market or smaller marketers. The fact of the matter is it's quite elastic. We're seeing larger companies that have got huge tech stacks and other things, but they like the efficiency and the effectiveness of the model and how that works. A couple of other thoughts in terms of innovative use. Largest category for us is enterprise tech. If we look at the other, we're across roughly about 35 or 36, what you and I would think of as B2B verticals, right? So financial services, business services, healthcare, few others out there. This is going to sound really funny. We have done some work with Invisalign, of all companies.
Really?
Now, I would love to tell you, we were such a great sales and marketing organization. We called on Invisalign and, it came at us. But they were doing some interesting work, and I'm learning a little bit about that work. But instead of purely orthodontists, prescribing Invisalign, dentists have access to this remarkable technology and capability as well. And so Invisalign is marketing more broadly to dentistry groups and things like that. And it's been kind of fascinating to watch some of the things, that they've been doing. And then last point I would make is more just the format. We've just seen some remarkable experimentation in what we call branded demand, which is taking highly programmatic display with advanced CPL-based, content syndication across the same data set and launching that. And that has been fun to watch. And we've seen a ton of companies do some really interesting things in that area and see some great performance out of it.
So I'm going to use that to bridge to you a little bit personally, because you probably didn't see Invisalign in your client, future when you were,
not
back
on my bingo card.
When you were helping Novell sell NetWare and 3Com sell Ethernet cards, right?
Yeah.
So much of your career has been in the B2B go-to-market space, right? And I always, for those of us who are old enough to go on this journey from kind of what I would consider content centricity to audience centricity to data centricity.
Yep.
And now, whether it's intent data or surge data or whatever, we've become kind of data obsessed. What's kept you in the game? What about this space continues to hook you back in when you could be on a boat in Newport?
Yeah. Some days I wonder about that, Sal. But I think, to be honest with you, I've never lost the curiosity. Early on in my career, I had fascinating, you talk about the road less traveled. I was at a little rep firm trying to get into the media business. I wanted to be a publisher. Back then, it was a magazine-driven world, and that was the pinnacle of the world. And I wanted to move to New York and be a magazine publisher. That was the far right quadrant for me. And I was at a rep firm, and I got 2 job offers. One was to go into a B2B company, CMP Media, if you remember the legendary CMP Media, as a sales rep. And the other was to sell ad space for Sports Illustrated. Ooh. And I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, man, very different paths here. And back then, I guess it was called Time Warner, was a big deal. CMP was a small family-owned company, or certainly smaller. And I made the wildly strategic decision that the CMP offer paid $10,000 more a year. So that's where I ended up going. But I'll be honest with you, I think intuitively, Sal, what I understood was the complexity around the B2B stuff, because I had been doing that at this rep firm, just fascinated me. I'd be sitting in front of someone like you, be a CMO of a company. I'd be like, how did you know that? Walk me through that. What do you mean by channel? How does that work? How do you know, what type of ads to create? How do you work with your agency? How does the sale go down? How does pricing factor in? And in the consumer space, that was far, far removed from the sale of the advertising. And as my career progressed, I think, I always just felt like, as I came up and I became a publisher, I always felt like I was helping build these companies.
Yeah.
I look back in those early days at Ziff Davis and other things. I'd like to think we helped build the PC industry as you know it. And so did IDG and other companies. And having a seat at that table, I guess, if that makes sense, Sal.
It does. It's funny because everybody talks about kind of Jobs and Michael Dell and Ted Wade of Gateway, right? And those guys. And I think people forget the Leeds family and the McGoverns and the
Yes.
Zips, right?
Yes,
And they were literally where the dialogue took place,
absolutely.
right? And the dialogue took place in this atmosphere. And it's interesting because, one of my questions for you that I was going to close out on was, where do you get your decision fuel? And I remember like going through the Computer Reseller News and eWeek
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
going through and just saying like, I know my competition's reading this, I better. Like, and it's like, where do you get that fuel these days to be like,
Yeah.
I've got to be able to discuss this with the people at the right level?
Yeah. Well, look, I don't want to be gratuitous here. I follow people like you. I really do. I follow people who have been in the game for a while, and I don't, that doesn't mean people that are new to it and just starting podcasting or stuff on TikTok or whatever around B2B marketing. But to me, being able to hear from people who have a sense of the perspective, I've seen this trend before, but this time it's different, or give that perspective to it. I wrote down a few names here because I just literally went through and I went on my daily reading list of the stuff. I don't know if you follow Rashad Tabakawala, the future does not fit in the containers of the past.
I haven't.
I think that's probably one of the better newsletters. It tends to be very marketing oriented, and he comes from a marketing background. There's a newsletter called GTM Monday from GTM Partners that I always find one or two little kernels of something in there for kind of investment stuff, to pay attention to markets. I follow Madison and Wall. It's a Substack, and it basically does like ad forecasting and kind of more macro,
Nice.
trends and stuff like that. And then the Daily Upside, which is kind of classic, finance stuff. And then Sal, probably, you and I were catching up and comparing notes on mutual friends. The other thing I would say is 2 or 3 times a week, I have a call with what my assistant refers to as the FOT list, the Friends of Tony list. And it would be folks like you. There's so many of these people, some you've mentioned the names before, that I just value. There's a friendship there, but I just value their insights. And every once in a while, I'll be wrestling with something. I think, I want to get Phil's take on this, or, whatever it might be, of just, getting that a bit of wisdom and perspective from somebody who's been in the arena and understands some of the dynamics.
Yeah. You touched on this earlier in the conversation. I think it was really insightful is we watch these hype cycles, right? We watched, the internet hype cycle. We watched the mobile hype cycle. And I think really the AI hype cycle, or the agentic cycle, as I call it now, because agentic has replaced AI, is just a compressed version of it.
Absolutely.
Right. We've seen the conversion, the compression of it all. But I think to your point, I find the network to be the most invaluable because just to your point, it's the combination of historical reference to another mega trend.
Yeah.
So by the way, thank you for being so generous with your time. This has been great. Let me close with this. One of the reason the name of the company, we named it Decision Council, was literally our belief that a good decision may be the most powerful thing that drives the company forward. The way you make decisions, right? When you think about like, I've got a big one coming up and I'm at a crossroad, is there a framework or a methodology that you have for like, okay, I need to put this in perspective? Because I love hearing how senior executives come to those decisions.
Yeah. Boy, Sal, I'm a huge fan of mental models and frameworks, and I use them a lot, and I experiment with new ones. But there's one that I honed through the years, and boy, did I learn this the hard way. So, I've made every mistake executives can make. The good ones I probably made 2 or 3 times, so I've learned everything the hard way. but I call it the 4 Ps. And so when I have to make a decision and I put these in rank order, I look at people, I look at product, I look at process, and then I look at performance. And the reason I do it that way is in fundamentally knowledge work, that B2B media and marketing and things like that is not only knowledge work, but it's not like you're running a factory where you can see something moving along, in a factory floor. I find that for the most part, if I'm faced with a challenge, I stop and think, hey, do I have the right people in the right positions? And am I giving them the right tools to do their job? Second thing, do I really have product market fit? Am I producing a product that the market really wants, or do I have some cost bias and I'm still producing this old product that's no longer relevant? And then process is probably, in knowledge work, the single misunderstood area. And as you well know, boy, you can unlock growth by really understanding process. Am I managing a process here that allows for throughput and allows for scale and allows people to do their jobs? And then I look at performance. And I think, earlier in my career, performance was the only thing I looked at.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, performance is a trailing indicator of something else. And my experience, Sal, is those 3 things that I mentioned, people, product, and process, are the leading indicators. And when I do my job right, which is not always the case, more often than not, thankfully, I do it right. I focus on those. And then, the performance, I wouldn't say takes care of itself, but I'm able to focus on those process orientations and then monitor my performance.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that correlation, how it all works together. Well, listen, I can't thank you enough for the time. This is, invaluable to me. And I really believe that we are going to see, I think, the repeat of the hype cycle resulting in a fallout this year. And then the companies that are executing at a really high level are probably the ones that are going to kind of surf through the disruption a little bit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
This was great. Thank you so much, and have a great holiday. Since you can see we're recording this at Christmas.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we'll catch each other on the other side of the year.
Look forward to it, Sal. Thanks again for having us on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, and take care.